Whether it's romantic, sexual, platonic, or professional, emotions will always play a large part in how successful or unsuccessful any relationship ends up. Relationships, by definition, require two or more parties to put forth some amount of emotional effort in order to keep the relationship afloat. Oftentimes one person takes on the brunt of the emotions, especially the negative or stressful emotions, that are produced in their relationships. This collective emotional give and take is called emotional labor. It's the work and effort we put into making sure relationships don't fall apart. This labor can be extremely taxing on a person, especially if they're A, the only one putting significant work into the relationship, or B, constantly being inundated with other parties' stress and negativity without the other people taking on any of that responsibility. What we often see in relationships, for example straight, romantic and sexual relationships, is that cis men have a much harder time accepting the responsibilities of emotional labor in their relationships. I personally have struggled with taking on such responsibilities, as much of a sensitive person I perceive myself to be. Whether it's complaining too much about issues at work, and by too much, I really mean too much, or shutting down when faced with emotional adversity, my fiancé ends up taking on that burden of my emotions, in ways that she doesn't put on me. And even though I've gotten better over the years, especially compared to our high school days, there's still a lot of work for me to do in that arena. This difficulty that cis men often have with emotional labor in their relationships mean that women and other partners are forced to take on its more burdensome aspects. That means they not only have to process their own feelings and thoughts as they apply to the relationship, but that they also have to accept any issues within the relationship as their responsibility to fix. There are many reasons why cis men might not feel capable or responsible for accepting this responsibility, although much of it most likely revolves around the desire or necessity cis men feel for not facing their emotions and not being vulnerable, since those actions are seen as unmasculine. Whether cis men would like to admit it or not, it is inherently important for any person in any relationship to understand the give and take of emotional labor and why it needs to be equal between partners. Below we will be going into more detail about what emotional labor is, how it affects relationships, how men can learn to be more emotionally responsible, and why it's so important for them and their partners. More Radical reads, 8 lessons that show how emotional labor defines women's lives. Emotional labor 101, what is it? Although the primary definition for emotional labor on Wikipedia concerns the workplace, it still applies to any other emotional situation one can find themselves in. The Wikipedia entries defines emotional labor as the process of managing feelings and expressions in order to fulfill emotional requirements as part of the job role. More specifically, workers are expected to regulate their emotions during interactions with customers, coworkers and superiors. Basically, emotional labor is the ability to regulate how one expresses their emotions in order to keep their job. In the context of this article, that job is a relationship. Relationships work best when all folks involved do their part in both A, expressing themselves in ways that support honesty, trust, and growth, and B, suppressing negativity or finding productive ways to turn negative feelings into positive outcomes. If someone in a relationship is unable to take on those responsibilities, relationships are bound to end painfully. Jess Zimmerman wrote for The Toast last year about how women often find themselves doing the majority of emotional labor in their relationships, romantic or platonic, with cis straight men. In a discussion of the idea of a woman getting paid for all of the emotional labor she does, she lists a few of the common emotional demands put upon women by cis straight men. Imagine a menu of emotional labor. Acknowledge your thirsty posturing, $50. Pretend to find you fascinating, $100. Soothe your ego so you don't get angry, $150. Smile hollowly while you make a worse version of their joke, $200. Explain 101 level feminism to you like you're 5 years old, $300. Listen to your rant about bitches, $infinity. Although there is some satire underlying this idea, I mean, you pay way more for 101 level feminism in college, so $300 seems comically underpriced. There is an inherent truth to this list. Women are expected to put in the emotional work to make sure that men are satisfied and unperturbed, despite men being able to let their emotions go with reckless abandon. Not only that, but women are expected to take on this emotional labor no matter how exhausting or debilitating it ends up being. If a woman doesn't take on that emotional burden, men often become angry and violent, and that woman, who may be a friend, relative, or romantic interest, quickly becomes one of those bitches he'll inevitably rant about to the tune of $infinity, no less. More radical reads, beyond the nice guy, creating a new masculinity in the 21st century. How can men be more fair with emotional labor? As I've been saying throughout this article, emotional labor is required for any relationship to work. A relationship without some aspect of emotional labor can't be a healthy relationship. It would be more along the lines of abusive. If you're a man in a relationship and you often have emotional outbursts of anger, for example, it's up to your partner to try to regulate the situation, which can be extremely exhausting, especially if it's a common occurrence.